I'm going to talk about the symptoms. I'm going to talk about why you have the symptoms, what happens, why the ATP is disappearing, and then I'm going to talk about the one bit of research that proves all this, and nobody can dispute it. We'll talk about the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. It's really important. I mean, I'm telling you that the symptoms of multiple sclerosis are identical to the symptoms of methanol poisoning. And that's important because not all the symptoms of multiple sclerosis have to do with demyelination. Stripping the insulation from a nerve, again, like I said, doesn't cause you to be tired and lethargic, and because that's, it causes certain symptoms. So let's take a look. Let's just look at the symptoms. We've got nerve insulation symptoms. That's what I call them. This is the amazing one. The amazing one, and it's named sort of weirdly, but it's myelin damage sparing the axon. Now that's quite a trick, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, this axon is an exquisite filament, very fine, delicate filament. If somebody said, okay, Woody, here's a slide of brain tissue. I want you to strip off that myelin from the axon so we can get a little better look at that. I couldn't do it. I'd mess it up. I'd start doing damage to the axon. It's a delicate thing. Myelin's pretty tough. So how the heck can you strip the myelin from an axon and spare the axon? Well, I don't know how. I mean, I know how it's done. It's done by macrophages, and that's why you can do it with methanol poisoning and an MS. You look at the slides of a person who suffered myelin damage from methanol poisoning, you can't tell it from a slide of tissue damage from a person who has got multiple sclerosis. Okay, the shooting pains thing, of course, they're false signals going to the bare exposed axon. Paresthesis, the pains associated with invisible pain, that kind of thing.
Excuse me, what are the numbers? Are they references for pages or something?
Yeah, they're references for articles.
Right.
Yeah, every time you'll see a number, there's a reference for an article, and you go on my website, put in that number, and that article will come up and you read it.
Right, no, that's
Vertigo, unsteady gait, okay, these are all common. I mean, other important symptoms, and these are extremely important symptoms. Headache. Well, demyelination is not going to cause you to have a headache. Stripping the myelin from the brain is not going to cause you to have a headache. Why? What's the only thing that causes headaches? And that's pressure. Pressure. And it's a very complex kind of thing because the brain has no pain sensation. When they do brain operations, commonly you're awake, and commonly they just anesthetize the cap so they can remove it, and then they're poking in your brain, and you don't feel anything. So pressure is what induces this, and it's inducing pain in other tissue. There's a thing called an MS headache. I suppose you heard of that. It's a terrible, terrible, monstrous headache. They talk about it, some MS societies in the States talk about it. It's the worst of the headaches, supposedly. But let me just relate to you a common situation. When somebody dies of methanol poisoning and they're doing the autopsy, it's not uncommon for them to, they take the cap off, they take the tissue off, they take the cap off, and once the cap's removed, it's not uncommon for the brain to just pop, as if it's just popping right out of the dura mater. There's so much pressure. Unbelievable amount of pressure. Why is the pressure happening? Where's it coming from? I'm going to show you. I'm going to tell you. The dizziness, the insomnia, these amazing symptoms of vision complications associated with multiple sclerosis. What are the only two diseases associated, well, not diseases, what are the only two
problems.
Thank you. God knows she's going to give the lecture. Would you give this lecture for me? Come on. I've had too many grapes. Okay. You can go blind and come back from the blind. You get your vision back. That happens in MS. There are many cases of this. It's in the literature reported commonly. Coming back from total blindness. Methanol does the same thing. Commonly reported. Blind drunk. They've consumed methyl alcohol. Okay. Headaches. Let me get rid of the headaches question right away. Okay, this is the thing called, memorizing this stuff. That's a monoblast. People object to me using somebody's axon there. Let me just. A monoblast is a very small cell that turns into a macrophage. Okay. The way it works is, if tissue in the body has an influx of a number of or a couple of these white blood cells, if those white blood cells call for help, if they get in there and they see that there's too much formaldehyde modified protein or whatever, and they need help, they'll call for these monoblasts. The monoblasts will start migrating from the spleen and other places in the body. This will take, 7 to 24 hours to happen. What they do is they migrate, and then they start turning into the macrophage, and then the macrophage starts turning into giant cells. And so what we're doing is we're taking a small cell, and it's causing a tremendous volume difference. Well, that's okay when it happens, on the outside of your flesh, but if it's happening inside your brain, this is where the pressure comes from. This is an interesting slide. You've all had MRIs, and probably the MRIs are what they've has told the doctor that you probably have multiple sclerosis. Okay, but you probably didn't know that what they're looking at, what the doctor's looking at, these white patches. Have you seen those in your own MRIs? These white patches, that's not demyelination, because demyelination wouldn't show up on an MRI. Because what an MRI differentiates is between fat and water. You take the myelin off of something and you're just reducing the fat, so it's not going to show up as anything. But if you take a brain, which is mostly fat, some brains are fatter than others, and if you joke, laugh, this is a good audience here, so, then you'll see a little white mark. This just shows the influx of the white blood cell. Okay. So look, this is the same person, January, February, March, April, a monthly change in the MRI. They have MS. Okay. But look at this. August, that's very prevalent. Now your doctor will say that's plaque, but that's not plaque. That's the white blood cells storming into that tissue around the vessels. But it may or may not turn into plaque. It's beginning the process, but there's going to be swelling involved in that. September, it's gone. These things change around. Demyelination doesn't change around. You can't have it one week and then not have it the other. The plaque itself is very long lasting. So I just wanted to show you that. So what's happening here? This is why we have these headaches associated with MS. If the methanol gets into the brain, change into formaldehyde. The formaldehyde causes the myelin basic protein change. Then all of a sudden, you've got macrophages floating into the brain, and that's what causes the pressure change. People, again, with methanol poisoning, the pain is excruciating if they can stay awake that long, if they don't just pass out for complete lack of energy. We'll talk about this lack of energy here in a second. This bizarre sign, symptoms of methanol poisoning. Blindness, temporary blindness, blurred indistinct vision, loss of green color sense, red color sense, yellow, blue successively. Many of these things you see in multiple sclerosis. This is bizarre. But why the heck is that? Why is vision so affected? Vision is so affected because the retina of your eye, there's a layer of alcohol dehydrogenase. Okay? And it's required basically for vision. The rod cells and the cone cells, it's alcohol dehydrogenase that causes the process that sends a signal to the brain. Okay, it's required for that. So that you have the highest concentration. They don't call it alcohol dehydrogenase. They have another name for it, but it is alcohol dehydrogenase. And so if this methanol then is being absorbed there and turned to formaldehyde there, then you'll expect the cone cells and the rod cells to be affected and to be very sensitive. This is what happens in methanol poisoning. This is what happens in multiple sclerosis. But why? Why is it doing that? But to get down to the basics of it, Vision requires a tremendous amount of energy. Energy is produced by your mitochondria. Okay. Formaldehyde is the most powerful poison known to man relative to its ability to stop a mitochondria from working and producing energy. If you turn off a good percentage of the mitochondria in your retina, you're blind. If you don't do that much damage to the mitochondria, they can come back. They're actually separate entities. They're almost like separate living things. You get all your mitochondria from your mother. It has its own DNA. So it can reproduce. If there's enough light in them, it will reproduce to the point where you get your vision back. That's the only way it can happen. Why different colors? Each color has a different number, has a cone cell with a different number of mitochondria associated with it. Some require a lot more than others. And so you get these strange visual things in both methanol poisoning and in, just to show you a little bit. I don't want you don't have to memorize but these mitochondria are amazing things. Again, there's every single cell in your body has to have them. And what they do is they produce energy in the form of these little molecules. And the little molecules have little, like ball bearing shaped atoms attached to them, molecules. And these things, when they break off, they release energy. And that is something used by the cell to give you the energy of life, to keep you awake. Okay? And it's required. And so these mitochondria take sugar and they convert it and they make this ATP stuff. Now the ATP stuff, we're going downhill on this thing. ATP is the battery that runs all of life. And it just behaves like this. So ATP, it has 3-phosphate attached to it, and it goes out into an organelle or someplace in the body where you need energy. That little organelle doesn't have the ability to make the ATP, the ability to break it off. Breaks off that phosphate and it releases a bunch of energy. Okay? So it goes from ATP to ADP in the phosphate. Well, guess what? It's a perfect mechanism because the ATP is not hurt at all. It's just broken into pieces. And so where does it go? It goes back to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria puts it back together again. So it goes the other way. The mitochondria puts it together again. And this is called phosphorylation. And it's just a way of saying making energy using this mechanism. We know that formaldehyde causes tremendous reduction in this, but the formaldehyde has to be in the cell to do it. It has to be inside the mitochondria. The only way that can happen is through methyl alcohol being metabolized. Okay? And this was the article that I got that from, just to prove that to anybody who's a scientist. 1 millimole of formaldehyde is a minute amount of formaldehyde. They've discovered in methanol, even in methanol intoxicated rats, to get a rat intoxicated with methanol, I mean, you can use a rat as an animal model, but you have to go above the toxic level of it. It takes a lot, but you can do it. And what effect does it have? And the reason you have to do that, by the way, is you have to put enough methanol in so the catalase, the peroxisomes are all saturated, and that leaves enough in there so the alcohol dehydrogenase that they also have has to metabolize. So it's a little tricky there. But anyways, and it just shows that numerous photoreceptor mitochondria were found swollen and extremely disrupted because of the mitochondria in the eyes of these animals were destroyed.